This is the 2012 Fisker Karma electric vehicle, and it is without a doubt the best looking car that you can get for around $100,000. For that matter, it's really one of the best looking cars you can get at any price, and it's arguably one of the sexiest cars ever made. The front grille is the one thing about this car that some people really don't like, and I'll admit that I have never been a big fan of it. Some say it looks like a mustache, others say it looks like the Cheshire Cat, and some say it looks like Jack Nicholson. Luckily, the front of the Karma is the side that is least seen. On the road, most people are going to see it from the side or from the rear. But even if the funky grille is visible, it's not the dominant feature of the car. Next up, let's talk about the wheels. The wheels on the Fisker Karma are 22 inches. Those are gigantic. I mean, this thing looks huge compared to any other car that you pull up next to. They're good wheels, they're easy to clean. My only problem are the tires that come on these wheels. These are Goodyear Eagle F1 supercar tires that were specifically designed for the Fisker Karma. Now, the tires work fine. Great grip, they're pretty quiet. I don't have any problem with the performance of the tires, but the problem that I have is that they're only rated for about 15,000 miles. That's not a lot. I even question whether they'll get 15,000 because the Karma is a very, very heavy car. It's about 5,300 pounds. That's a lot of weight to put on rubber, especially rubber as thin as what's on here. Also, this is an electric car. That means it's got regenerative braking. That means the rear tires are going to take the brunt of the force. It's a rear-wheel drive car, so when you accelerate, the rear wheels take most of that energy, and braking, the rear wheels take it as well. So I'd be surprised if these things don't need to be replaced, every 12 to 18 months. Okay, now this next item of the car is probably one of the coolest features. This is a huge 120-watt solar panel. It's big, it's curved, it looks really neat, but if you live near the equator, it's sunny all the time, you park your car outside all the time, well, then you might get about 200 miles of charge per year. If you do the math on that, that comes out to about $10 to $12 worth of free electricity per year. Well, this solar panel was originally going to be about a $5,000 option on the Karma. We can only guess that it's still adding about $5,000 to the value of the car. So if you figure $5,000 divided by $10 of free electricity per year, well, then it would only take you 500 years to break even on the cost of this solar panel, assuming that you lived in the right place and you left your car outside for 500 years. So, the solar panel seems pretty useless, right? But you know what? It has one other purpose, which here in Texas actually is kind of useful. You have your car outside on a hot day. This thing, in addition to recharging the battery, well, barely, it also runs a fan on the inside of the car to keep the inside of the car cool. So when you get in, it's not a 140-degree oven. So the trunk on the Karma is obviously not very big. But honestly, it's pretty adequate for most daily chores. I mean, you can go grocery shopping with this thing. Everything fits back in here. This will hold your luggage. It'll hold pretty much everything you need realistically. It's not an SUV. You're not going to be able to get the dog in this car. So the Karma really is a thing of beauty, but unfortunately there are some issues with build quality. The car's built like a tank. It's rock solid. But the quality control folks at Valmet Automotive who assembled this car need a slap on the wrist because most of the body panels look like they were put on by a 12-year-old. There are huge misalignment issues all over the car. When this car arrived at the dealer, the hood was so out of whack on the right side that you could almost see under the fender. Luckily, the dealer was able to adjust it enough to get most of the problem out, but the QC folks at Valmet should have done this at the factory. Okay, let's move on to the interior of the car. Now, when I first saw photos of the interior of the Fisker Karma, I was not real impressed. To me, the car kind of had this retro 1970s thing going on, and I really wasn't sure what the story was. But this is another part of the car that you really just have to see in person to appreciate it, because in person, the interior of this car is absolutely gorgeous. It's got a very unique look. It's very, very stylish, and it's probably the most elegant car interior that I've ever seen. Now, it's not the fanciest car interior in the world. It's not like the interior of a Bentley or even like a Mercedes, where there's, huge sweeping wood panels and hundreds of shiny little chrome buttons. No, instead, the interior of the Fisker Karma is all about style. It's simple, it's beautiful. In many ways, you could think of this as being the iPhone of car interiors because it is so simple, yet so well designed. Now, most of the controls for basic functions like the AC controls, the radio controls, everything is on this center 10.5-inch screen known as the command center. There are no physical buttons for any of that stuff. And above it, there are 3 actual buttons for some other things. There's the lock door button, the hazard light button, and this little button with the hand on it is, believe it or not, the button for the glove box. Why they would put the glove box button right there, so prominently located and nowhere near the glove box, is beyond me. Frankly, I think I could have come up with 100 other better uses for that button, but that's the way it is. Now, I like the design here, but I'm one of those kind of old school people, I suppose, that just likes analog controls. I mean, I hate having to take my eyes off of the road when I'm driving to navigate through a menu screen just to lower the temperature in the car by 1 degree. This car is really complicated. I mean, if you're too warm, it's pretty dangerous having to fidget with it just to get it cooler in here. I really would have preferred a dial, a standard temperature dial. And same with the radio volume. You have to press these little digital controls that are hard to reach down there. And honestly, there are just some things that all cars should have manual, analog controls for, and I think those are some of them. So right here in front of the armrest, we have a few more actual buttons. The coolest thing here is the gear selector pyramid. It's just a little cluster of buttons. It gives you your drive, neutral, reverse, and park. And I really like this. This is one of the better designed, button things in this car. And right below that, you've got, believe it or not, actually 4 buttons for controlling the windows in the car. And that actually is a little bit surprising considering how everything else is on the command center. I mean, even the seat warmer buttons are on the command center. So right below the command center is this clear window. And what this is a little portal to let you see the battery that runs down the spine of the car. There's another little window in back so that your passengers can see it as well. And honestly, in my opinion, this is the biggest single design flaw of the interior of the Fisker Karma. I don't need to see the battery. It's not interesting looking. It's not like one of those, fancy watches with a clear back and you get to see all the gears moving. There's absolutely nothing to see here. You can't even see it half the time. It's just kind of a dark, shiny thing. I think that this area would have been much, much, much better served being a tray to put things. Same for in back. I've had passengers in the back go, what is this and why isn't there anywhere for me to put stuff? Whether it's car keys, change, cell phones, whatever. One other really unique thing about the Fisker Karma are the doors. When people first get into this car and they try to get out, they often go, what do I do? There's no lever. It's not like a normal car. You pull a lever, the doors pops open. Instead, on this car, the doors are electronically actuated. There is a little button that says open. You press the open button, and then the door opens. Now, whether that's better than a normal lever, I have no idea. But, it's another one of those things about this car that just makes it unique and makes it cool. I really like it. And a lot of people always ask, what happens if the power goes out? How do you get out? Well, there is an emergency release, underneath here. You pull a little panel and there's like a ripcord. You pull it, it'll open the door. So you don't have to worry about getting trapped in here. But, it's just one more little cool thing that Fisker added into this really unique car. The steering wheel on this car is beefy. This is the thickest steering wheel I have ever felt in any car. And it's cool. I like it. It's something to really grab onto. It's a nice, comfortable steering wheel. They did a nice job with the controls here. You've got your volume controls, your changing station controls. It's also got voice command controls, but the voice command in this car doesn't work, but there's controls there for it. On the right-hand side, there's a mute button for the audio, cruise control settings. For the dashboard, Fisker decided not to go down the path of the video game dashboard that so many other hybrids and EVs are implementing these days. Instead, they've designed what looks like a classic analog dashboard, but it's actually composed of separate LCD panels. So it's really a mix of classy, old school, and modern technology. Overall, I like the dash, but my only major beef is that the speedometer is extremely hard to read accurately. The needle doesn't extend all the way to the tick marks, so you've kind of got to guess within a mile or two per hour of how fast you're actually going. Well, the top of the dash is all leather. The seats are like half leather, half suede. The front of the dash is mostly this suede material, and it all actually looks very, very nice. However, there are a few, build quality issues with the interior, just as there are on the exterior of the car. The leather overall is fine, but honestly, in this price range, some of the tucking of the leather, I think, could be a lot better. There's some wrinkly areas, and it just doesn't quite have the perfect fit that you would expect on a six-figure car. Okay, earlier I mentioned the command center. Now I've got to talk about it. Luckily, I'm not going to talk a lot about it because I think this thing is so awful that it deserves a review all to its own. So later on, I'll do another video just about the command center because it's probably going to take 20 minutes to go through this thing. So for now, I just want to briefly say this thing is the weakest link of the entire car. It is crap. Everything about it, from the user interface, which is, by the way, in my opinion, the worst user interface in the history of user interfaces, and that's saying a lot. The color scheme is horrible. It's gray on gray, so on a bright sunny day, the glare on here is terrible, and you can't see anything because there's not enough contrast. The font they use is, I don't know, like 9-point microscopic, font that makes it also impossible to see. I mean, look at, it's just gray on black, white on gray. What were they thinking? The thing crashes all the time. There are screens that don't do anything. For example, there's this solar energy screen here. This is supposed to show you how much solar energy your solar panel on top has collected. Well, this doesn't function. This has never functioned. This appears to just be like a static JPEG that they're bringing up to show you or something. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. I'll talk more about it later, but for now, suffice to say, this aspect of the car gets an F-. A lot of people would think that this car would have a really, really cramped back seat, and it is cramped. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not, a giant SUV or anything like that, but it's better than a lot of other cars in this kind of category. I actually think that this is more comfortable than the back seat of an Aston Martin Rapide. There's, a reasonable amount of leg room. The seats are comfortable. Headroom wise, it's a little bit tight. I'm only about 5'7", and I fit in here just fine, but still there's, maybe a ½ inch gap between my head and that ceiling there. So it's probably not a great place for really tall people, but for the average person, this is a pretty decent back seat. It's nothing you're going to want to sit in a cross-country trip, but if you're just taking friends out for dinner, they'll be comfortable. This is not bad. So the first thing that needs to be said about the Fisker Karma when talking about the driving experience is that this is not a sports car. It may look like a sports car, and a lot of people expect it to perform like one, but it definitely is not. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure if this car would qualify as a sports sedan. Really, about the most sporty thing about this car are the brakes. The Fisker Karma has outstandingly good brakes. I believe one of the other reviews for this car rated it from a 60 to 0 stopping of only 110 feet. Now, 110 feet would be good for any car, but for a car that weighs 5,300 pounds, that's really outstanding. And I suspect that if you're driving on pavement with really good traction, you could probably do even better than that, because when you hammer the brakes on this, oh my God, it will rip your eyeballs out of your head. It's amazingly good. Now I need to talk about the two different driving modes in this car. There's stealth mode, which is the mode that we're in now, and that's when you're running pure electric, just on battery. And then you can go into sport mode by tapping the paddle behind the steering wheel. And what sport mode does is it turns on the internal combustion engine under the hood. That fires up the generator gives you a little bit more electricity, and so it combines the electricity from the generator and the battery. It gives you the full 403 horsepower that this car is capable of. However, even in sport mode, I would not call this car sporty at all. As a matter of fact, you can hardly really tell the difference when you're in sport mode and stealth mode. It's a pretty subtle difference. But to prove the point, let's go ahead and do some 0 to 60 tests, both in stealth mode and in sport mode, and we'll see what we get. Now you do get some sense of acceleration in this car, but unfortunately most of it is when you're going from 0 to 40 miles an hour. So if right here, if I punch it, the acceleration is pretty good. I mean, your head goes back in the seat, but once you hit 40 miles an hour, you're pretty much done. And the problem with that is that, you know, at highway speeds, this car feels a little snail-like. If there's a car in front of you, and you're going 55 miles an hour, and you need to pass this guy, well, you better give yourself quite a bit of room to do that passing, because there's just not a whole lot of power there. All that power is really on the low end. Even when you're in sport mode, you know, that power curve only gets you maybe another, 5-10 miles an hour, so you might feel the acceleration up to 50. Now, the other problem with sport mode is that when the internal combustion engine is running, it makes a pretty obnoxious sound. It's 4 cylinders, it's loud, it revs at really unusual times. It's not something you want to have going when you're stopped at a stoplight and there's other cars around, because they're going to look at you and think that there's something wrong with your car and that it's going to explode. And, if you want to try to race somebody, which I think is pointless in this car, but if you did, you don't want to do it in sport mode, because, it's embarrassing when you punch the gas and suddenly that 4-cylinder kicks in and just makes this horrible sound. The Fisker Karma is a very quiet car. Matter of fact, this is probably one of the quietest cars in the world, because all you hear, at least when you're in stealth mode, is the sound of the tires and the sound of some wind, and that's pretty much it. The only bad sound that the Karma makes is this kind of peculiar wind turbulence noise that happens on both of the rear windows and on the sides. There's some kind of strange turbulence issue going on that causes this kind of crinkling, rattling, tapping sound on the windows in the back. It's actually really, really annoying, and it only happens whenever you're going at about 55 miles an hour or more. So when that happens to me, I usually just turn up the radio to try to drown out that noise, because it is a persistent, non-stop noise that I'm hoping the dealer will eventually be able to figure out and fix. So the visibility in the Fisker Karma is really one of my favorite things, and that may sound strange, but this has the best visibility of any car that I've ever owned that wasn't a convertible. I mean, it's amazing. They have put these gigantic side view mirrors on the car that give you an amazing view of what's next to you. The B and C pillars in this car line up perfectly so that you don't have any problem with blind spots back there. You can see pretty much a full 360 degrees in this car, and that really, really surprised me. I did not expect to have that happen when I bought this car. Now, I mentioned before that the Fisker Karma has regenerative braking. It actually has 3 different regenerative braking modes. It has Hill Mode 1, Hill Mode 2, and then essentially no hill mode. In the no hill mode, you still do have regenerative braking, but it's actually very subtle. If you flip the car into Hill Mode 1, now we've got a little bit more. So if I let off the accelerator, the car starts to come down in speed, and you get a little bit of that energy back. If you flip it into Hill Mode 2, now we have the maximum regeneration. So if I let off the accelerator, the car drags a lot more, and you can feel it, kicking in, and you get a lot more of the energy back. Hill Mode 2 is actually the mode that I like to drive in the most, because It allows me to almost never have to hit the brakes. If I'm coming up on a stoplight, all I have to do is let off of the accelerator pedal. The car will come to a near stop all on its own, and you get most of that energy back. This car, in my opinion, is really best suited for city driving and for non-highway driving. I mean, it really is at its best when you're going slow. And I mean slow, but I mean speeds under 50 miles an hour are really when this car shines. It does great in start and stop traffic like you would find in the city, because the regenerative braking means you're never really hitting the brakes. You just let off the accelerator, you come to a stop. It makes driving very easy. And on roads like this that we're driving, where, you know, it's curvy, but we're not really going very fast, it's fantastic. I mean, the handling is superb. The sporty looks of this car also make people think that it probably rides like a sports car. Well, in the same way that the performance is nothing like a sports car, it's kind of a good thing that the ride is nothing like a sports car. As a matter of fact, this car has one of the smoothest rides of any car you'll find. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's really freaking heavy, right? I mean, 5,300 pounds, that's a lot of mass, and that mass absorbs a lot of the high-frequency vibrations that you would normally feel while driving on a road. Additionally, the gigantic 22-inch wheels on this car, those pretty much just glide over any small bumps in the road. So you're left with a very, very smooth ride. The handling in this car is interesting. Now, it's a very heavy car, 5,300 pounds, and believe me, you feel all 5,300 pounds of it when you're driving this car. But the low center of gravity, thanks to this battery pack that runs down the middle, really keeps the car incredibly level. It handles turns fantastically. Now, it's not a sporty feel at all. Believe me, definitely not a sporty feel, because you feel like you are lugging around something big. I would actually say that this car feels more like driving a 1979 Buick Roadmaster than it feels like driving a sports car. That being all said, the drive is very nice. It's smooth, the car stays level, it goes very straight. It's not sporty, but for a sedan, it is an outstandingly good sedan drive. Now, there are a lot of people out there that criticize the Fisker Karma as not being really a green car. Those people just don't know what they're talking about. I drive this car in a fairly hilly area, which means that I don't get the best mileage. And even then, I still get about 42 to 44 miles on a charge. That's pretty good. Now, in gas mode, you also get about 24 miles to the gallon, give or take, depending on how you're driving and where. 24 miles to the gallon, that's not eco. Yeah, that's pretty bad, I admit to that. But the fact is that you're not going to be driving in that mode very often. So what you have to do is you have to look at the average. What is your average MPG with electrical plus gas combined? Well, according to the trip computer in this car, I've been doing 100 miles to the gallon. That's pretty good. Matter of fact, that's really good. I mean, how many other eco cars are out there that get 100 miles to the gallon, and yet they're cars that you'd want to drive? Which leads me to the charging station. Charging the Fisker Karma is a pretty simple process. You take the charging thing, you bring it on back to the back of the car, you pop the flap, you try to line it up, you plug it in, and there you go. Now, why Fisker put the charging port all the way in the back of the car, I'm not really sure. Most electric cars have their charging ports either up here on the side or all the way in the front, because that's how you usually enter parking spaces, and that's usually where charging stations are located. But to make up for this, Fisker did put a really, really long charging cable on their charger. And they had to, because this is a 16.5-foot long car. Most charging stations only come with 18-foot cords, which means if you're not able to park very close to the front of your garage, your cord won't reach. So this coiled cord that's 20 feet is definitely a good thing. The Karma charger here is actually made by Lear. This is one of the simpler chargers that you're going to find. It costs about $850. It's very basic, very simple, but it does what it needs to do. The only information it gives you is whether it's charging or it's charged. It takes about 5, maybe 6 hours to fully charge a depleted battery on the car. So what does it actually cost to fill up a Fisker Karma? Well, based on the current Austin energy rates, it costs me about $2.20 to fully charge this battery. Now, if you do the math based on the current gas prices, that means that it costs me around a third, maybe a quarter as much as it would cost to go the same distance in a gas-powered car. All right, so at the end of the day, what kind of letter grade would I give the Fisker Karma? Well, exterior styling obviously gets an A+. This car is best of breed. Interior styling, I would give an A-. It's still excellent, but definitely some room for improvement. User friendliness, that's an area where this car is lacking. We've got this command center from hell. We've got software that malfunctions constantly. But on the plus side, we do have a nice steering wheel with good controls here, and we do have excellent visibility. So user friendliness, I'm going to have to give that a D. It's pretty poor overall, definitely room for improvement. Drivability of the car, well, that also is a bit of a mixed bag. On the plus side, it's very smooth, very quiet. On the downside, this car does lack power. So I would give the drivability a letter grade of a B. It's good, could be better. Overall, though, I would say that the Fisker Karma is a B+. It's a very good car. It just needs a few refinements here and there, some build quality improvements, and then it would be worthy of a letter grade A.